Welcome to the Lean AI podcast, where we're flipping the AI conversation on its head by focusing on holistic strategies and tactics that drive AI adoption, rather than focusing solely on overcoming the technical challenges of AI. In every Season 1 episode of the Lean AI podcast, we talk with corporate AI leaders just like you, who've uncovered secrets of driving successful AI adoption with far less wasted time and investment. Our guests challenge established views and offer disruptive perspectives, providing new actionable insights. Hey everyone, welcome to the Lean AI podcast. This is our first podcast from the road. Today, I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome Christina Mongan, who is a 20-year veteran in the corporate innovation, technology, and AI space. Really, over the last 10 of those 20 years, she's been solely focused on AI at big companies like Comcast, Vanguard, Microsoft, and today she works at Unisys as the Global Director of AI Practice. And in her current role, she's been instrumental in guiding organizations through successful AI transformation journeys. So she'll be sharing all those insights that she's had from all those different experiences with you today, some do's and don'ts that are really powerful. And in her current role as Global AI Director at Unisys, she's led many organizations through successful AI transformations. So with that, Christina, welcome. We're absolutely thrilled you're on the show. I just wanted to highlight for the audience your unique and powerful background that you have in kind of corporate innovation, technology, and AI. So if you could just give a quick overview of your background, that would be great.
Thanks for having me, Ben. So I've spent about the last decade focused on AI and innovation, leading an emerging tech program, as well as several data and AI excellence initiatives.
And I know we'll probably get into some stories and some successes and some lessons learned later on in the podcast. So when it comes specifically to AI, let's focus on, what you've been doing the last 10 years or so. Can you give us a flavor for the types of AI initiatives you've been working on?
Sure. So within financial services, we launched data science excellence, really looking to elevate across from the strategy platform, as well as then launching a Center for Analytics and Insights to say, how can we take that not only internally, but as well as externally with our customers? In addition, in my current role, I work with clients on their AI transformation journey, as well as looking at how our organization can use AI more.
So Christina, you've had a lot of roles at a lot of pretty famous companies, quite frankly, in both corporate innovation and technology and AI. Could you give us a flavor for the types of roles and companies you've worked at in the past 20 years?
So I spent about a decade in media at Comcast, where we elevated intelligence all the way to the C-suite with enterprise business intelligence. Took that experience over to Vanguard, where we launched a new set of advice offerings, as well as our data science excellence program. And then more recently, I've been taking that and working directly with clients. So first at Microsoft in their data and AI organization, and most recently at Unisys, working with clients on their AI transformation journey.
Wow, that's great experience. So as you look across all those different types of roles and experiences and companies, where do you see companies making mistakes when it comes to developing AI-powered products and workflows?
Oftentimes, I see as technologists, we get so excited by this next latest announcement. Any week, you can see the series of new models released and launches of the recent announcements. But that too, that makes us have a tendency to start with technology first, as opposed to being business first and human centered in our approach. And so then we talk into technology details instead of actually thinking about the problem we want to solve.
And does that go for kind of across the board in terms of developing products for external customers, doing internal AI transformations, developing AI-powered workflows for internal customers? All of the above, or just part?
Yeah, I think I've seen it on both sides, right? Because we're like, let's chase the next shiny object. Even though we might not say that specifically, we're like, oh, I should be using more AI. And with the inflection point of generative AI in our current stage, and I even see it in boards and C-suites, so feeling more and more pressure on what are we doing with AI? And so then they're compelled to say, well, how do I get my teams using AI more? And that's where the conversation starts, as opposed to then stepping back and saying, instead of what can AI do, saying, what are we trying to achieve with AI?
So tell me more about that. So rather than starting with technology first and saying, we got to use AI for something, what would you recommend based on your experience across all those different roles?
I really like to say, let's start with our AI ambitions and look at identifying innovation areas and AI areas of where we can create a portfolio of AI opportunities.
And how do you identify that portfolio of opportunities? What are the best practices that you've seen?
Right. So I think about this in a very similar way that we did in innovation, right? Look at those areas of friction. For example, American Express reimagined expense reporting. And I'm sure any of us that have done business travel can think about how much they cringe at the amount of times that we've had to staple, tape, and then reconciled transactions to every dinner and such that was related to that business travel, right? Thinking about how could we have AI infused into that process that could make it more seamless so that we can focus on the relationships and meetings we're having during that travel instead of worried about where did I go to lunch today and is that going to match up to what my total sum is for the day?
And so maybe starting with human problems to be solved, how do you align or do you recommend aligning with kind of the overall company strategy? Is there a tie to that kind of innovation or AI strategy to the company strategy? Is it important that it be linked or is it okay that it's maybe a little bit disconnected?
I think it very much needs to be in line with what are the top priorities because we think about like why AI projects fail or innovation ideas don't move forward is this the right problem we're solving? Is this something that is important to the business? And is it significant enough that it can make an impact and someone's going to be willing to invest money and resources to solve it?
No, that's powerful. So I got a little bit ahead of myself, right? I was asking about some of the common mistakes or things you've seen, the don't do's, and then we got a little bit into the what should we do. Is there anything else other than, starting with a technology first approach that you'd recommend companies or other AI executives not do?
I think other challenges are thinking about let's not sprinkle in AI into a broken process. Have this be an opportunity to rethink how we do things. Is this something that could be improved or optimized with AI, or is this an opportunity to completely reimagine how we're doing that and potentially then looking across departments? So, for example, how marketing and sales work together. Is there an opportunity to actually look across the value chain of how are we then communicating with our customers? Is there a way that we can do that in a new and different way to engage?
I like it. So I think some don't do's. Don't be technology first. Start with what the business is trying to achieve and what humans, presumably your customers or internal users are trying to achieve. And then the second don't do is don't sprinkle AI into processes that are already broken. Take the opportunity to repair the process or to update the process and then consider how you might be able to augment that with AI. Those are two fantastic recommendations on what not to do. Anything else that you'd say is maybe a pitfall or a watch out where you'd say to another corporate AI executive, hey, make sure you don't do that?
I think the other piece is in terms of thinking about like, where's the most impact that we can have? Thinking about not just incremental improvements, but thinking about what does this mean more strategically, right? If you really want a competitive edge, how are you going to find that today when so much is being democratized? You need to think about what do I do that's unique? Do I have data that's unique that will create the competitive edge? How can I have this? How can I use AI more in a domain or industry specific ways to reimagine business models and how I'm working with my customers in terms of how I'm delivering for them?
That's great as well. So is that more of a kind of a right to win, not going after every opportunity, but rather saying, where do we think we have the right to win because we've got a competitive advantage or we're uniquely positioned to do something, making sure you focus on that as opposed to running off and working on smaller, maybe more incremental opportunities. Am I paraphrasing that correctly or not?
I think so. I would take it an even step further, right? It's thinking about AI for your strategic win. How do you stay competitive in the future? We actually have an article that we published last year in Harvard Business Review all around saying like AI is beyond productivity. What does it mean for you to be competitive in this age of AI?
That's great. And we'll make sure to link to that Harvard Business Review article in the show notes.
Thank you.
Okay. So we've covered 3 key don't do's. Is there anything else that you might mention in terms of what not to do when it comes to developing AI products and workflows?
Maybe it's not so much a don't do, but rather a have patience because AI and innovation is a long game. Even though we want to showcase some early wins, your bigger impact is going to be a multi-year rollout. So don't be so short-sighted in the next quarter on when it's not quite delivering value. You're going to need to give yourself a broader horizon, especially when you talk about more of these transformational and disruptive opportunities. You need time to have that then materialize and have the teams iterate through that bigger opportunity.
It's so important. So what not to do is don't be impatient, right? And so it's tough because most of our listeners are working at companies that, work on a quarterly basis, quarterly targets, quarterly goals. And so there's a little bit more short-term focus and perhaps rightly so. So maybe let's use that as a pivot point to get into what to do. So based on your experience, what are those kind of lean AI practices? Lean AI defined as how do you make sure that you're building something of value without wasting a bunch of time and money to find out you've built something nobody wants? And so how do you recommend then that a team, let's say it's an organization or a collection of teams at an organization who are working on AI initiatives, how do you recommend that they show progress even though it's difficult to do so, on a monthly basis?
I think it's very much about taking an inner approach like we did in innovation, starting with early stage concepts, prototype, and getting that prototype into the hands of users to be able to say, does this improve my marketing and sales flow? How am I then seeing value today? And then taking that feedback and iterating to improve into a longer term product strategy. And as part of it, some of what you're showcasing on in that monthly report may be actually not just measuring the reports, but also showcasing the learnings and saying how might that influence how we can improve this product or service.
I like that a lot. And so you said, be iterative. Don't build the whole thing over 2 years and then launch it and then find out that you built the wrong thing, or maybe you did, right? Maybe you got lucky. So be iterative. And then also you're talking about communicating those results to stakeholders of some kind. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because it sounds like that's pretty important.
Sure. I think it's important to then say about how am I testing my hypothesis quickly here? By that, I mean, and if I said that, could we do this process in half the time? Or could I make a product that would make us 10x from what we are today? How can I then validate that and report back on here's some of the improvements that I'm seeing from our original baseline? Additionally, to your point on go off and build it for 2 years, the technology is moving faster than that. You're going to need to be able to iterate because the next advancement might totally transform how you're building. Just think about how we've moved from text-based models to multimodal in the last year. And now all the focus is on agents. Like that's going to continue to be a continuous architecture and discovery that's needed to influence your product design.
That's great. So we've started with some to-dos now. Do you have any other to-dos? And then maybe for these, if you could share a story, because you and I have talked several times before. I know you've got a lot. You could take us through an example of how that thing that you should do translated in real life.
I think an important to-do is to think about these as stories because these early wins become the success stories that are the narratives that you share with your other groups across the organization that essentially become the blueprint and create headlines to propel AI adoption across the organization, unlocking those more transformational and disruptive multi horizons that we were talking about before. Because the goal is to actually create this flywheel effect for funding and unlocking more transformation opportunities. I think through this, one of the ones that we most recently were talking about was what we called data driven organizational change management. So, really taking a more data driven approach to change management. And so, then infusing that process with AI to be able to make recommendations on what might be the next change approach that would be needed in terms of where could we bring in another champion, or how we might look at what groups need more training. And this actually launched as another podcast of where we talked about it. And it was about adopting teams and thinking about how to be more collaborative as an organization. But again, it wasn't just about launching a collaboration tool. It was to say, how do I change a mindset of an organization and get the teams connected across the global organization, across multiple time zones? So that means that you need a human element that you should be discussing just as much as the technology, if not more.
It's an emerging theme on, this podcast and lean startup companies' work, and I know your work as well, just the importance of, I guess the word for it's change management. That's a little too clinical for me, but like you said, it's the human side, right? So build it and they will come. When it comes to anything technology, just doesn't work because it changes the way people work. It challenges their closely held beliefs, even beliefs they're not aware they have, and it interrupts their lives if it's done poorly. And if it's done well, people think, wow, this is great. And this is going to save me a bunch of time, a bunch of money, and this makes my life easier, even though it could be exactly the same product or technology. Any thoughts on that or stories you could share?
Yeah, I love that. We were actually talking about that again this week of if we really do AI well, we will not be talking about AI because AI will not be present in that experience. Think about if you go to Netflix and look for the next show. You think that there's a recommendation engine behind it? Probably not. When I get into my Tesla and turn on autopilot, or which wipers are already set to auto, do I think about the neural network that's behind there? No, I'm just grateful that it adjusts as the rain comes down harder. Same thing in terms of when it then brakes when we're in traffic, right? I don't think about all of the technology aspects of it. I just appreciate having a co-pilot making my driving experience better. I think that's true as we think about then products and workflows and bringing in AI more into our own. It should be the same thing, right? Is that I want it to be that AI is so abstracted away that I don't realize AI is a part of the process. It is just a more delightful way of working and interacting with products. And I think given the consumer AI apps now, those expectations are just going to continue to raise at each next iteration.
Yeah, and like you said before, things are changing so quickly. It seems like every week there are more ideas on how you can help improve customer or user experiences, and that takes time, expertise, and a lot of iteration, as you pointed out earlier. So, Christina, before we got on, and actually started recording, you were talking about the importance of being outcome focused. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure, I think it's important to understand what are you driving towards and using the discovery for your AI opportunities to not just think about learning and doing research, but also about creating solutions that customers want and really create value.
So, when we're talking about outcomes, do you mean customer outcomes, business outcomes, or all of the above, or something else?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand for both, right? So, like if you think about on the healthcare side, is it around patient outcomes as well as or higher ed to think about then your student outcomes, right? So all of those stakeholders, because some of which might be users of your AI product, right? Some of may be buyers of your AI product. but to understand all of those personas and stakeholders that you're then delivering not only on business outcomes, but on the broader outcomes of that ecosystem.
So tying that back into human element and making sure that we're solving problems for users and customers and not just getting enamored with the technology.
Yeah, very true.
So what are some of the other essential lean AI practices that you've identified? We've talked about being iterative, communicating to stakeholders, being deliberate about telling stories, particularly when you're early on in the journey and you've got some early wins. We've talked about the importance of change management and the human element. What are some of the other essential lean AI practices that you've uncovered?
I think it's important to spend time in the problem space. So, like, as you're thinking about these AI products, what problem are you solving? And to make sure that then you're spending enough time in that problem space so that you're articulating that challenge and problem to be solved, so that then you're framing that opportunity or innovation idea in terms of the business, the user, the consumer.
So I think for many of our listeners, I think we're nodding our heads, right? Yep, we should spend more time in the problem space. I know you've had a lot of experience in this space. Could you give a concrete example of what that means? Anonymize it. We don't need to know which company it was at or which clients or anything like that. But is there any example or story that comes to mind where you think, wow, that was just a great way of spending time in the problem space? And then what were maybe the steps or like, what did it feel like?
One area where we were looking at it was really as more of us worked from home and we started recognizing burnout. But I don't think we classified it as that. You see it as symptoms that end up blurring the line of the underlying problem. So we think about, like, how do we tackle burnout? So companies would then assess how burned out their teams are and why. So we'd send out surveys and gain insight. But those surveys didn't necessarily lead to ideal results, even though they were well intentioned. They give a inaccurate representation of the underlying problem, because you could then be working longer days because you connected with someone in Australia. So now you're meeting at 9 o'clock in the evening and not realizing that now my day is getting more and more extended. But was that actually the underlying problem? Or was there other problems that actually resided and ways that were wasting time or energy in the wrong areas? So I think we thought about, do you ask people if overwork is the issue? Are there ways that you're trying to reduce the load? Or what are those real problems in terms of creating boundaries and expectations?
So you'd mentioned spending enough time in the problem space. So it sounds like there were some surveys and maybe some interviews. What are some of the other techniques that you use for really examining the problem space, whether they're tactics or even tools or things like that that you would recommend?
Yeah, so I do think it's about trying to then double click on those symptoms to really say, what is the underlying challenge here? For this, I think it was really about, like, thinking about new ways of working. Did that mean not connecting as much on meetings, right? And thinking about more asynchronous ways. But again, that was not going to intuitively come out in surveys, but rather thinking about, how do I reimagine how I want to work and get the outcomes as a team? So was that status meeting needed? Or actually today, could we just have AI summarize those key topics and share with the team?
No, that's great. I appreciate you diving deep into that. So we've got a long list of to-dos here. Most recently, make sure you spend enough time in the kind of the problem space. Any other kind of essential lean AI practices that you might recommend for your fellow corporate AI executives?
I mean, I think it's really around creating this culture of experimentation. I think that was critical in innovation and really needs to be brought over here, is terms of, how can we prove this out cheaply? Is that gambling? Does that look like a series of bets? Or can we actually be a little more strategic, and does it look more like counting cards in terms of what items that we're thinking about prioritizing and looking at moving forward?
I love that analogy. I want to use that in the future. It's the difference between taking big risky bets and counting cards. Want to share any other stories specifically that you feel are important to share with this audience?
One I was going to comment on was around like, don't be afraid to pivot as you're thinking through this product. There's going to be times when you're like, is this really one that I want to take forward? Or is this an opportunity to pivot? Or maybe this is one that is really not proving that value. And so we need to take it off the list. And that is a hard challenge to do, to say this opportunity that I thought was going to bring in this revenue or be the next transformational product. And now we're saying we're going to back off and not do. That's probably the hardest part, is to then say, let me take this opportunity off and not pursue it. But that is probably the most important part in doing corporate innovation or with AI, right? Is to say, this is not showcasing the value. So we're going to move on to something else so that we're better allocating our funds and resources.
So important. So there's, pivot, persevere, and park, right? I guess. So you were talking about pivot and park, and it's very difficult to park an initiative that we thought was going to be great, and we just can't find any evidence or traction that we should move forward with it. Can you talk to us more about pivoting and what that means specifically in the AI context? And then maybe a story if you have one.
I think just as much on pivoting is important. I see it oftentimes with clients. We might come in initially and say, let's work on this space around quality control for manufacturing. But as we get into talking with others, we realize that maybe the focus is not around manufacturing, but is around some of the corporate functions like finance. And so you shift from the original list of use cases that you outlined and said, but this is a more pressing issue for the business. So let's move here. And that's perfectly fine. Actually, I think most times that we come in with a set of use cases is not necessarily the ones that then become the ones that actually get built out, because they're essentially used as inspiration in terms of how might we use AI, but rather than thinking about what are the top priorities for the organization, what are the most pressing areas, is the ones that then get the attention, and we need to rethink where are there use cases that apply to those areas.
Great. Are there any other kind of essential lean AI insights that you feel would be important to share with our audience?
I think there is an aspect also about innovation in AI often feel chaotic and very broad and abstract. Don't be so concerned with that. Rather, embrace that chaos and ambiguity. Think about like future state, then working backwards. But it's okay to be in this like chaotic space. Just like innovation is, you're envisioning the future version of this. Use that chaos as inspiration to what do you want that future to look like?
Embrace the chaos. True of innovation and certainly true of AI, especially since it's so fast moving right now. So I'd say let's go to the lightning round. So we've talked about a lot of to-dos and a lot of don't do's. So in summary, whether we've already covered them partially or not at all, what are maybe the top 3 insights that you just share with your fellow corporate AI executives that would save them a ton of time and money and help them really build AI products and workflows that users and customers love?
Top 3 is, don't forget the human element, right? That should be core of what you're doing, right? This needs to be human centered. Who are you solving for? And understand the who and how big this pain point is for them. 2 is then be brutal in your prioritization in terms of what are you taking up? Like, is there a strong business case for that? Like, what is your hypothesis that this can be a new product for our customers, or this can 10x our company? Really think through what that ambition and hypothesis is, and that you have strong enough convictions to take it forward. If not, go back to the problem space that we talked about and come up with why you think this is important to move forward. And then 3 is all around mindset and experimentation. You're not going to be able to pick out precisely which ones are going to be your strong candidates later. So you have to be open to saying, let's take this up as an experiment. Let's think about this as a portfolio and be willing to fail along the way.
So I want to double down on that last point. It's a really insightful one. And I'm not sure we've covered it yet on the podcast. So you just said you can't pick the strongest use cases up front. So can you talk a little bit more about that? What does that mean?
So much of this is you don't know what's the future holds. You don't know that unknown. So you're gonna need to be able to really tease out that use case and potentially compound set of use cases for what that means for your organization. So that means you're going to need to go through and iterate on that future version.
Big company incumbent mindset and process is let's pick the right thing to do, build a big plan, and then go do it. And I think you're right that in the space of AI and innovation in general, we're dealing with uncertainty. And so you can't pick the strongest AI use cases up front. And that's a huge mindset shift for a lot of people that are working in the AI space.
Well, and moreover, look at just some of the examples of as OpenAI has made new announcements in terms of how many businesses their next announcement then takes out some of their own customers because now they're filling that gap, right? So an area that startups thought that they could take on, OpenAI's next announcement pretty much takes away their market share because now they're solving for it, or that problem is no longer needed to be solved for.
Yeah, so interesting. Christina, thank you so much. These always feel like we've only been talking for about 5 minutes, but we've been going for about 40. So really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Lean AI podcast. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation I had with Christina as much as I did. Just remember the true potential of AI isn't just the technology, it's how we as leaders drive our teams to solve real human and business problems using the technology. The Lean AI podcast is brought to you by Lean Startup Co. To find out more about our Lean AI approach to generating more AI wins with far less wasted time and investment, including our training workshops, pilot programs, and full implementation offerings, visit us at www.leanstartup.co. Search the Lean AI podcast in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, and make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Lean Startup Co., thanks for listening and sharing with your colleagues and friends if you found this episode insightful.